And once again, I want to say greetings to each and every one of you, Aquaba, and welcome. Welcome to another round of the Conscious Rasta Report here on LIB Radio, LIB TV, and livinginblack.com. My name is Keedy Awado, aka the Conscious Rasta. Weekday mornings, you and I get together live. We come at you from 9 a.m. Pacific time, that's 12 noon Eastern time, 5 p.m. GMT, and 8 p.m. East Africa time. We get together with you and we deal with culture, consciousness, historical perspectives, entertainment, economics, education, health, labor, law, politics, religion, family conflict, future studies, all areas of human interactivity and development. Today's date is Tuesday. It is the 5th of November, 2024 in the Western calendar. This corresponds to the year 6264 in the Kemetic calendar, to which we have realigned our cultural clock. Welcome to the 7th millennium. You have found your family in a peaceful place on LIB Radio, LIB TV here on livinginblack.com. Bear with me as I didn't get my green screen in place. So if the picture looks a little sketchy, it's because I had just had too many things on my brain. And one of those things that I do at the last few minutes before going on the air is put together my chroma key screen. So we're just going to do the best we can with what we got. And just realize it does look a little sketchy, doesn't it? Let me see if there's anything. I'm not going to worry about that. What we are going to focus on today, we have a very powerful topic for today's discussion. Let me get right into that topic. The title, World War VI, the rise of BRICS plus resistance to Western dominance. Now, this is another ongoing chapter in my upcoming book. That book is entitled Disaster Preparedness for World Wars V and VI. And I hope you find this to be a compelling conversation. Here, let me see. I'll get the subtitle in here real quick. Disaster Preparedness for World Wars V and VI here. The subtitle, The Untold Story of How the Global Economic and Security Order is Shaping Up for the 21st century. So that's what we have on the table for today. Let's go right into it. I have been writing, and this is one of the largest chapters. Perhaps it is the largest chapter of the book because this is so incredibly dangerous to the health and prosperity planetary. This is very, very dangerous what's going on. I begin with this quote from Raghuram Rajan, professor of finance, Booth School at the University of Chicago. He wrote, and I quote, "The rise of BRICS Plus is a challenge to the existing global order, as it represents a coalition of nations that are ready to assert their interests on the world stage." And let me tell you, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with nations coalescing, forming collaboratives, cooperatives, coalitions to build the world that they envision would be best for their self-interest. There's nothing at all wrong with that. But as you will see, there's another camp that absolutely, positively demands that that not be done. And so these hostile camps are forming. Let's go into this topic today. First subtopic of this chapter is entitled New Orbits, Alliances, and Fault Line Conflicts. Wouldn't it be wonderful to live in a world where the dominant values that govern the global society are founded upon truth, justice, harmony, balance, reciprocity, propriety, and order? Can we imagine a paradigm-shifting rebirth of compassion, empathy, equality, brotherhood and sisterhood, freedom and tolerance? It would be so nice to be able to trust those in charge of governing nations and the spectrum of agencies upon which the public has entrusted their protection and leadership, held to the highest principles of logic, morality, and civic duty. Throughout civilization's history, ideas have persisted of utopian societies. For good reasons, it is best that we hold on to such visions and find a way to invest our collective intelligence toward securing such a future for future generations. There are so many good and empathetic people in the world. However, there persists a small minority with opposing values that have achieved positions of disproportionate power and influence. I was born onto this beautiful water-covered pearl of a planet nearly 7 decades ago. During my years on the planet, it has experienced an unbroken history of wars, conflicts, mass violence, exploitation, and massive theft of resources at an unthinkable scale and scope. In this world that we want to pass on to our children and future generations, is this the world that we want to pass on to our children and future generations? If not, then we had better find a way to commit 8.2 billion people to transforming our collective morals, values, logic, and reasoning for a sovereign and sustainable future. Meanwhile, back at the front line of global warfare, things have heated up again. We are witnessing the formation of what might turn out to be the greatest storm of violence since the beginning of the 20th century, World War VI. Opposing camps are being formulated, and numerous front lines are staging military skirmishes. Established political leadership is entrenching their hard-nosed positions that perpetuate and escalate hostilities. We intend to share a cohesive narrative that allows us to understand what's going on. According to this system of reasoning, this newest global conflict finds its roots in the other 5 world wars that we've examined in the book so far. This new confrontation has emerged from the contest for empires, the showdown between capitalism and socialism, religious rivalries, and ancient battles involving greed, dominance, xenophobia, hierarchy, and intolerance. Just as it was forecasted after the collapse of the Soviet Union and 25 years of monopolar dominance of the world's economic and security order by the United States, its allies, and the institutions that they dominate, a new opposition to Western hegemony has risen. A new alliance comprising Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, BRICS, emerged in the early 2000s as a coalition of major emerging economies. Initially conceptualized by economist Jim O'Neill in 2001 as a potential threat to U.S.-dominated Western hegemony, the group aimed to enhance cooperation in economic development, trade, and political influence. BRICS countries rose to challenge any inevitable Western dominance in global affairs, promote multipolarity, and foster sustainable development. In time, BRICS efforts have culminated in a series of escalating summits and collaborative initiatives to propagate shared challenges and interests. The BRICS alliance emerged in 2006, born out of the worldwide recession sparked by the U.S. home financing crisis as a response to the dominance of Western-led institutions. The acronym represents Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, 5 emerging economies seeking to strengthen their position globally. The first summit in 2009 in Russia commenced a platform for collaboration focused on economic growth, development, and consistent standards for global governance. BRICS has since expanded its scope, established institutions like the new Development Bank, and expanded its membership, intending to rebalance the global order and promote a more equitable international system. With such initiatives, it should be no surprise that the U.S.-dominated Western order would fear an existential threat from the emerging bloc, and it appears to be getting much worse. If there were to arise an open conflict between the Western Christian NATO bloc and the emerging BRICS Plus bloc, which countries would be involved, and how might these challenges become expressed? The G7, also known as the Group of Seven, is an intergovernmental political and economic forum consisting of Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the United Kingdom, and the United States. Additionally, the European Union, the EU, is a non-enumerated G7 member represented at all meetings. The G7 members are reputed to share values of pluralism, liberal democracy, and representative government. They are all major economies and members of the International Monetary Fund advanced economies. The first G7 summit of heads of state and government was held in 1975 in Rambouillet, France, with the founding members being France, the United States, United Kingdom, Germany, Japan, and Italy. Canada joined the bloc in 1976, completing the current configuration of the G7. Excuse me. Russia was added to the G7 as the Group of 8, G8, from 1998 until March 2014. The G8 was formed to incorporate Russia into discussions reflecting a post-Cold War desire for greater cooperation between former rivals. Russia was indefinitely suspended following its annexation of Crimea and involvement in the conflict in Ukraine. Russia announced its permanent withdrawal from the group in January 2017. So that is this first section of the book, and that is the rise of BRICS, resistance to Western. The next one, or actually that section was new orbits, alliances, and fault line conflicts. The next subchapter, showdown, the West, NATO versus BRICS plus resistance. Before I go into that, let me just double check and make sure that anybody out there in our listening audience, we'd love to hear from you today. We'd love to hear what's on your mind. I do believe I have a good sized audience. So I'd love to just, if you don't have to type in anything fancy, just let us know you're in the house. Hit the like button if you would, please. And let's build together. Let's grow together. World War VI. It's already begun. the rise of BRICS and resistance to Western dominance. We're going to talk about these battlefronts, and you're going to agree by the end of this chapter, we are currently witnessing World War VI. Now, today happens to be a day that America has been so excited about. The United States has the longest election process for a presidential election of any other of the developed nations. So the longest. Many nations do their leadership elections in like 3 months. The United States is 2 years, 24 months. It's crazy. And so today is a culmination of that. I'm not really interested in following that. I don't have a dog in this race. I don't have a pony in this race. If Tweedledee wins, then Tweedledee, do your thing. If Tweedledum wins, Tweedledum, you do your thing. By the time you hear today's chapter, I think you're going to understand a good deal of why I have no primary interest in the outcome of this election. If I do weigh the candidates against each other insofar as war mongering versus less war mongering, there is a preference for the red tie over the blue tie, because the blue tie, just quite simply, is really aggressive. And the record shows that. But the red tie is really incompetent, belligerent, narcissistic, xenophobic. And neither one of them are going to build the world that you and I would wish to hand over to our children. Do you agree or do you disagree? What are your thoughts? We'd love to hear what you think about what it is that we are talking about today. So let us continue. And where we at? Is we is or is we ain't? Okay, we is. Okay, so let us go ahead and continue our conversation. Next subchapter, showdown. The West, NATO versus BRICS plus resistance. If an open conflict were to arise between the Western Christian North Atlantic Treaty Organization NATO bloc and the emerging Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa BRICS plus bloc, the countries involved and the challenges expressed would be significant and multifaceted. And bear with me here, where we is. We ain't there. I'm sorry, I'm just double checking my streams in the background, making sure that the integrity of today's broadcast is just what it is intended to be. So here is a breakdown of the countries that would be involved. First, countries involved in the NATO bloc. As of October 2023, NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, has 31 member countries from Europe and North America. They are Albania, and these are in alphabetical order. They are Albania, Belgium, Bulgaria, Canada, Croatia, Czech Republic, Denmark, Estonia, France, Germany, Greece, Hungary, Iceland, Italy, Latvia, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Montenegro, Netherlands, North Macedonia, Norway, Poland, Portugal, Romania, Slovakia, Slovenia, Spain, Turkey, United Kingdom, United States, and Finland. Of the BRICS plus bloc, they include Brazil, Russia, China, South Africa, India, I missed that, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and the newly expanded membership, including Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and United Arab Emirates. Saudi Arabia has yet to commit to that invitation, and they are hedging. Additional countries that have expressed more than a passing interest in joining BRICS include Afghanistan, Argentina, Algeria, Bangladesh, Bolivia, Cuba, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Comoros, Gabon, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Mexico, Nicaragua, Pakistan, Turkey, and Venezuela. In total, over 40 countries have expressed interest in joining the rapidly expanding BRICS Plus alliance. These countries view BRICS as an alternative to global bodies dominated by Western powers and hope membership will unlock benefits such as development finance, increased trade, and investment. As of the most recent revelations, as the beginning of the third quarter of 2024, Turkey, now referred to in the world as Turkey, is preparing to exit NATO and align itself with the BRICS group. And I do need to put in another update from the most recent summit, BRICS summit, that just took place in, I'm trying to think of the name of the city. I think it's Zavan, Russia. There are now, I think, 14 member BRICS partnership nations, not full members, but partnerships. So there are 9 members and then these additional partnership members, which brings the group up to, I think, 23 at this point. Might be 22, but I think it's 23. Next subchapter, potential challenges and expressions of conflict. Number 1, military confrontations. These include, point A, proxy wars. Similar to the Cold War, conflicts might occur in third-party countries where NATO and BRICS Plus support opposing sides. And number 2 on this, direct military engagements. And here, bear with me here. I am just doing a quick, I'm not going to do this. I was just trying to do a quick edit, but what's happening is because I'm broadcasting, the resources for the memory resources for the computer are not good right now. So let me just skip doing that and I'll just come back and do that later. So direct military engagements, potential flashpoints could include disputed territories or regions of strategic importance. That's already happening. We're going to go into that. Point 2 of, again, potential challenges and expressions of conflict. Point 2, economic warfare. Sanctions and trade embargoes. Both blocs might impose economic sanctions on each other, affecting global trade and economies. It is already happening. Economic warfare and also resource control. Competition over critical resources like oil, gas, and rare earth minerals could intensify. Yes, it is happening, and we are witnessing it. And the third area of confrontation, cyber warfare. Cyber attacks. Both sides could engage in cyber attacks targeting critical infrastructure, financial systems, and government networks. And another point here, NSO Group, an Israeli technology firm known for developing surveillance software, most notably the Pegasus spyware. Pegasus is designed to infiltrate mobile devices, allowing operators to access messages, photos, and other sensitive information, as well as activate microphones and cameras without the user's knowledge. The software has been controversial due to its use by various governments and organizations for surveillance purposes, raising significant concerns about privacy, human rights, and the potential for abuse. There have been numerous reports of Pegasus being used to target journalists, activists, and other political figures. And that included Khashoggi, the Saudi journalist who was targeted by the Saudi government and assassinated after they used the Pegasus software to spy on him and trace him and locate him. And third, under this category of points of confrontation, information, or a third point, information warfare. We're talking about cyber war again, propaganda and misinformation campaigns to influence public opinion and destabilize governments. Still under this category of potential challenges and expressions of conflict are number 4, diplomatic struggles. Point, alliances and treaties. Efforts to form new alliances or strengthen existing ones, potentially drawing in non-aligned countries. And point 2, international organizations. Conflicts within bodies like the United Nations, we see it happening. World Trade Organization, we see it happening. And others, as each bloc seeks to assert its influence. And point 5, humanitarian crises. Point A, refugee flows. Conflicts could lead to large-scale displacement of people, creating refugee flows. We see it. We have seen it. It is continuing. Human rights violations. Increased military actions and sanctions could exacerbate human rights abuses and humanitarian needs. We see that happening in so many places around the world. World War VI, people, I'm describing it. Do you see? Are you news savvy? Do you see this happening in the world that you exist, that you inhabit? I hope I'm not the only one who sees these. Number 6 of the potential challenges and expressions of conflicts, technological and space race. Point, technological dominance, competition in areas like artificial intelligence, AI, quantum computing, and biotechnology. Point 2, space exploration. Rivalries in space exploration and satellite technology could become more pronounced. Still under the category of potential challenges and expressions of conflicts, number 7, propaganda as weapons of psychological warfare. Nationalist propaganda has been employed as a tool of psy-war to influence the opinions, emotions, and behaviors of targeted groups, often with the goal of supporting national objectives. Point A, strategic. Nationalist propaganda often operates at a strategic level, targeting large audiences or entire territories, as seen in the use of mass media, airborne leaflets, and other forms of broadcast communication. Point 2, propaganda analysis. Propagandists analyze their own and competing propagandas to understand their effectiveness and adjust their strategies accordingly. Point 3, under propaganda, intelligence functions. Psychological warfare is often accompanied by intelligence functions such as propaganda analysis and audience information to gather insights on the targeted audience and tailor the propaganda efforts. Next point on propaganda, it's multifaceted. Nationalist propaganda can take various forms, including radio broadcasts, false flag events, and the threat of chemical weapons. The notion of white supremacy and the supremacy of Western science as seen in historical examples. These historical examples they're talking about include Lord Haw Haw. During World War II, German radio broadcasts such as those by Lord Haw Haw targeted British and American audiences with nationalist propaganda. They also include Chinese influence operations. China has invested heavily in shaping its national image and influencing international public opinion. And 2 more categories of the propaganda that we want to talk about. Bear with me here. 2 more categories include, where are we at? Let's go here. Boom. And sorry about this. I find myself formatting these things. Okay, here we go. Military Information Support Organizations, MISO. Modern psychological warfare involves the planned use of propaganda and other psychological operations to influence opposition groups, as studied by organizations like RAND. And another example of these propaganda that I will mention includes HIV/AIDS and COVID-19 pandemics. I'm not going to dwell too much on those right now, but I hope that you can see how we have determined that these are propaganda programs. So going forward, bear with me 1 second. Let's go forward. The next, we're talking about nationalist movements, grassroots nationalist movements like those in China can employ propaganda to promote their agendas and shape public opinion. According to the United States Department of Defense, psychological warfare is the planned use of propaganda and other psychological actions, having the primary purpose of influencing the opinions, emotions, attitudes, and behavior of hostile foreign groups in such a way as to support the achievement of national objectives. So, in summarizing this section, these challenges highlight the complexity and potential global impact of a conflict between these two powerful blocs. Again, we've been talking about potential challenges and expressions of conflicts. So I have another set. I've used various search engines. I'm just going to go quickly through these. NATO, BRICS, bloc confrontation scenarios, country involvement and conflict expression. And here's what it had to say. Bear with me. Okay, here's what it had to say. Based on the AI search engine results, and this one comes from Brave, the BRICS Plus bloc currently consists of Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, and United Arab Emirates. Argentina and Saudi Arabia were asked to join, but Argentina bypassed and Saudi Arabia is stalling. And then we talk about these potential conflict countries that may be involved in an open conflict between the Western Christian NATO bloc and BRICS bloc include NATO members, United States, European Union member states, an example, Germany, France, UK, and all of the others. Other NATO allies, including Canada, Australia, and Japan. BRICS plus member states with potential internal conflicts include, and this is a very important point, that inside of both blocs, especially more so, I would say, the BRICS bloc, there are certain internal conflicts, including one, Saudi Arabia, due to its rivalry with Iran, Egypt, due to its rivalry with Ethiopia over the Nile River, and Iran, due to its regional conflicts and potential nuclear ambitions. Different challenges and expressions rising from an open conflict between the Western Christian G7 NATO bloc and the BRICS Plus bloc might become expressed in the following ways. Geopolitical tensions, increased military posturing, deployments, and exercises along borders, particularly in regions with existing conflicts. Example given, Middle East, North Africa, South Asia, and on the Korean Peninsula. Point 2, economic sanctions. Again, economic sanctions are a weapon of war. They are. They always have been. It's not violent war. It is the precursor, quite often, to violence. Or in the case of Iran, Israel, and the United States, economic sanctions blends in with violence, bombings, and violent conflict. So economic sanctions. Imposition of economic sanctions by NATO-aligned countries against BRICS Plus member states, potentially targeting key sectors like energy, finance, or technology. Trade wars, escalation of trade tensions, including tariffs. Here, bear with me. Let me do this. I can do just a little bit of formatting here. This one doesn't disturb it. Trade wars, escalation of trade tensions, including tariffs. It's already happening. Quotas and restrictions on goods and services affecting global supply chains and economies. Next point, we talked about this a little bit earlier, cyber warfare. Increased cyber attacks and espionage attempts by member blocs targeting critical infrastructure, financial systems, and strategic industries. Cyber attacks on Iran have been a significant aspect of international cyber conflict and have primarily focused on its nuclear program and military capabilities. Key cyber war incidents include 1. Stuxnet 2010. This was one of the most well-known cyber attacks attributed to a joint effort by the United States and Israel. Stuxnet targeted Israel's Natanz nuclear facility, specifically its centrifuges, causing them to malfunction and significantly delaying Iran's nuclear program. And I would say nuclear development. Point 2, Flame 2012. Another sophisticated cyber espionage tool, Flame was designed to gather intelligence and was believed to be linked to the same group that developed Stuxnet. It was capable of recording audio, taking screenshots, and collecting data from infected computers. Number 3, cyber attacks on critical infrastructure. In recent years, there have been reports of attacks targeting Iran's critical infrastructure, including its oil industry and banking systems. These attacks have been aimed to disrupt operations and create economic pressure. Number 4, retaliatory attacks. Iran has been reported to engage in cyber operations against perceived adversaries, including attacks on U.S. government and private sector entities, often as retaliation for previous cyber incidences. These cyber operations highlight the increasing role of cyber warfare in international relations and the complexities surrounding national security, privacy, and the potential for escalation. Other aspects, again, we're now talking about BRICS member states with potential internal conflicts. And I think I moved into another chapter since then. Or we're talking really still under the category of potential challenges and expressions of conflict. So regional instability, spillover effects into neighboring regions, exacerbating existing conflicts and potentially drawing in additional countries, nuclear proliferation, concerns about nuclear weapons development and proliferation, particularly in regions with existing nuclear programs, example given, Iran, North Korea, Israel, and others. Pakistan and India both are on the periphery of this NATO versus BRICS plus confrontation. India is a member of BRICS and Pakistan has applied to become a member of BRICS plus. Of course, realizing that if Pakistan joins the same coalition with its hostile enemy, India, it could be beneficial for both countries in resolving those lingering hostilities, or it could be another internal flashpoint by which both countries run the risk of somehow hurting each other and or the group. So, who's out there today? Are you talking to me? I want to hear from you. Talk to me. Talk to your brother. Share your thoughts. What do you think about this analysis? Is this accurate? Is this usable for us understanding what's happening in the world today? Today we are talking about World War VI, the rise of BRICS plus resistance to Western dominance. Let's go forward. Global governance, challenges to the existing international order, including the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, and the World Bank, as both blocs seek to promote their own interests and values. And this challenge to the UN, the IMF, and the World Bank is happening right now. The BRICS has developed the BRICS Development Bank, a direct response to the IMF and World Bank. And also, the BRICS bloc is insisting that the UN Security Council be reformed and threatening, there are raised threats of just exiting the United Nations in the favor of, if it can't be reformed, then let's just quit it, drop it. These expressions of conflict would depend on the specific circumstances and escalation dynamics, but they would likely have far-reaching consequences for global politics, economies, and security. Let us continue. Another point, we're still under the potential challenges and expressions of conflict, containing China. The concept of containing China has been debated and reevaluated over the years with various perspectives emerging. Here is a summary of the search results. Number one, the historical context. During the Cold War, the United States employed a containment policy against communist states, including China. The Pentagon Papers revealed efforts to contain China through military actions in the Vietnam War. Point two, shift in focus. Following President Richard Nixon's rapprochement with China in 1972, the focus shifted from containment to leveraging China's cooperation in containing the Soviet Union. Formal diplomatic ties and normalized trade relations were established in 1979 and 2000, respectively. Current concerns. The Biden administration has identified China as a top geopolitical rival and seeks to contain its perceived threats through a coalition of allies and partners rather than unilateral action. This approach acknowledges the limitations of a single country's ability to contain China, as it also supports our analysis demonstrating the global nature of this front line confrontation. ASEAN and Quad. The Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, and the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue, Quad, are seen as potential frameworks for containing China's regional ambitions. However, ASEAN's focus on economics and avoidance of security issues, particularly in the South China Sea, pose challenges. And just a couple more points here. And most of us don't even think about these alliances such as ASEAN and Quad, but we really should start paying attention. The next point, island chain strategy. The concept of an island chain strategy, which aims to contain China through a series of military bases and alliances along the first island chain from Japan to the Philippines, has been revived. Critics argue that this approach is overly ambitious and could lead to miscalculation. This is a dangerous provocation. Another dangerous provocation by the U.S., which seeks to dominate military facilities across the region. And already, look at the number of military bases the United States has in Southeast Asia and the Western Pacific. The U.S. has over 700 military bases around the world. Many of them in that region. We ask the question, how many military bases does China have within 500 to 1,000 miles of the U.S. coast? We can see that there is a problem. Okay, so here, that's that very important point I wanted to get in as well. Let's continue. Trade war and economic competition. The ongoing trade war and ongoing and escalating. With China is seen by some as a means to contain China's economic rise and limit its technological and industrial and advancements. However, others argue that this approach is counterproductive and may ultimately harm the United States, its industries, and its allies. Risk and cost. The pursuit of containing China comes at a significant cost, including the potential for economic stress, financial losses, and even military conflict. The United States seems willing to pay any price to achieve its goals, short of an all-out nuclear war. But as we have shown elsewhere in the book, some 6,200 plus nuclear explosions have occurred during the Cold War period. So we understand their concerns, but we understand we have the record. So let's go forward. Next subchapter talks about, again, we are in today's chapter of the book, World War VI, the rise of BRICS plus resistance to Western dominance. So that's where we are for today. We'd love to hear from you. Love to know that you are in the house. Check in. Just tap in a couple of letters, a word. Say hey. Say hi. Say good analysis, or say eh. But I'm not getting any response, so I'm just going to keep on going. I have to finish this book. I think the book is going to validate itself, and I don't necessarily need my listeners to be actively engaged to have this record go into the world record. It would be nice. It would be so nice if the best things that we do that are for the collective would be appreciated in real time. But that's just not the world we live in right now. We're living in a world where people have become internalized in their own affairs. Next subchapter, the Venezuela-U.S. rivalry. Joining the BRICS bloc could offer several potential advantages for Venezuela and the group itself. These include, but are not limited to, point one, economic support. Membership could provide access to new markets and investment opportunities, helping to stimulate Venezuela's economy. 2.2, diversification of partnerships. It would allow Venezuela to diversify its international relations and reduce dependency on Western countries, particularly in trade and diplomacy. Number 3, increased trade opportunities. Part of being BRICS could facilitate trade agreements with member countries, enhancing exports and imports. Access to development funds. Venezuela could benefit from financial support and investment from BRICS nations, particularly in infrastructure and development projects. And the next point, political alliances. Aligning with BRICS could strengthen Venezuela's political standing and provide a platform for collaboration on global issues that matter to the country. In talking about Venezuela-U.S. rivalry, what would be the advantages for BRICS of Venezuela joining? Point one, increased influence. Adding Venezuela could enhance BRICS' influence in Latin America, expanding its geopolitical reach. Resource access. Venezuela is rich in natural resources, particularly oil, which could benefit other BRICS nations seeking energy security. Diverse perspectives. Venezuela's inclusion would bring additional perspectives on regional issues, enriching discussions and cooperation within the group, strengthen South-South cooperation. It would reinforce the BRICS commitment to fostering cooperation among developing countries, promoting shared interests. Now, just one more paragraph I want to insert here. At present, Brazil is opposing Venezuela's inclusion. So I'll just finish that one. But Brazil is at present opposing Venezuela's inclusion because of the idea that Venezuela's leftist government somehow has rigged elections there. I'm going to do a little bit more research and add their opposition and their points of accusation. I think it's fair, only fair, that all viewpoints that can support the larger narrative be included here. These advantages would depend on various factors, including Venezuela's domestic situation. And in fact, that's the same idea, just in a different paragraph. Which Brazil has pointed out. Next paragraph, the concept of the clash of civilizations by Samuel Huntington identifies potential sources of conflict based on cultural and civilization differences. When considering the possible frontiers of open conflict between the NATO Western Bloc and the BRICS bloc of nations, several fault lines might emerge over the coming decades. And let me just put that in as a subtitle: the clash of civilizations. In this context, I probably will change that title, that subtitle, a little bit later. But here, let's just go in, because this is a new section of this chapter. The clash of civilizations in this context. The concept of the clash of civilizations by Samuel Huntington identifies potential sources of conflict based on cultural and civilizational differences. When considering the possible frontiers of open conflict between the NATO Western Bloc and the BRICS bloc of nations, several fault lines might emerge over the coming decades. These include geopolitical influence in Asia. We mentioned earlier the South China Sea. Claims and military presence could escalate between NATO allies and China, a leading BRICS member. India-Pakistan relations. The West's support for India might clash with BRICS backing of Pakistan, leading to regional instability. Again, the BRICS acronym includes Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So the backing of Pakistan by a group where India is one of the primary founders is undeniably problematic. Energy resources. Middle East and North Africa. Competition for energy resources and influence in oil-rich regions could lead to conflicts, especially with Russia and Iran as significant players in BRICS. Russia and Iran, both major oil exporters, as significant players in BRICS. And point two, Venezuela, when we're talking about energy resources, as a member of BRICS Plus, Venezuela's resources could become a point of contention, particularly if NATO seeks to influence its political landscape. And this NATO seeks to influence Venezuela's political landscape. Just to clarify there, the issue of cybersecurity and technology. We mentioned this a little bit earlier. Again, some of these ideas are repetitive overdrive. As I gather all of this research to put together a cohesive narrative, then I have to squeeze and compress it down and make sure it is just that, a cohesive narrative. It's not overly confusing, and please do not be overly repetitive. Cybersecurity and technology. Cyber warfare, increased tensions over cybersecurity could lead to conflicts, especially as BRICS nations enhance their technological capabilities. Pegasus is one such spyware developed by the Israeli cyber arms company NSO Group that is designed to be covertly and remotely installed on mobile phones running iOS and Android. While NSO Group markets Pegasus as a product for fighting crime and terrorism, governments around the world have routinely used the spyware to surveil journalists, lawyers, political dissidents, and human rights activists. Next, under cybersecurity and technology, 5G and digital sovereignty. Disputes over technology standards and digital infrastructure could create divides between the two blocs. Under the category of military alliances and defense, point one, Eastern Europe. NATO's presence in Eastern Europe may provoke responses from Russia, as we can see in Ukraine, leading to potential military confrontations, I would say leading to the expansion of military confrontations similar to those that occurred in Georgia, Crimea, and Ukraine. Let me reread that. NATO's presence in Eastern Europe may provoke, and Eastern Europe is actually Western Eurasia, let's be clear, may provoke additional responses from Russia, leading to the expansion of military confrontations such as those that occurred in Georgia, Crimea, and Ukraine. And arms proliferation. Conflicts arise from arms races, particularly in regions where BRICS nations seek to expand their military capabilities. Next subchapter, global governance and multilateral institutions. The United Nations and international law. Disagreements over the roles of institutions like the UN could lead to conflict over intervention policies and global governance norms. There is a big dispute right now within the UN Security Council that the Western dominated United Nations and Security Council is totally ignoring the human rights catastrophe and military catastrophe taking place in Sudan. And I predict that we are going to see increasing pressure across the BRICS bloc to get some sort of resolution to the Sudan civil war into place. We've actually seen moves along those lines taking place just within the last 2 weeks or so. But there's nothing really definitive there. And of course, the Palestine, Israel, Iran, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen confrontation that's taking place there is dominating headlines, including the West Bank and Jordan. So climate agreements under global governance and multilateral institutions, climate agreements. Divergent approaches to climate change and environmental policies could increase friction, especially if resource management becomes a point of contention. Next, cultural and ideological conflicts. Human rights issues. Differing views on human rights and governance could lead to tensions, especially if NATO countries impose sanctions or intervene based on these issues, while at the same time, China and other nations accuse Western allies of their own domestic human rights challenges. We could mention Afro-Americans, Palestinians, and Mediterranean migrants into Europe So those are just examples of this. And I'll highlight that and come back in and develop that section of this issue out just a little bit more. Cultural and ideological conflicts. Oh, here we go. Migration and refugee crisis. That was just a very same point I was just making. Conflicts could continue to emerge from differing approaches to migration, particularly in regions experiencing instability, such as the Mediterranean, Syria, North Africa, and Eastern Europe. These potential frontiers of conflict reflect the complexities of international relations and the interplay of cultural, political, and economic factors. Continued dialogue and diplomacy will be crucial in managing these tensions. I would say not managing these tensions and resolving. Because that managing these tensions sounds like healthcare. It's not curing the patient, it's managing the symptoms. And let's talk about the geographic fault lines. Based on the concept of fault line conflicts from the clash of civilizations, potential geographic frontiers, let me get that correct, potential geographic frontiers of open conflict between NATO, Western Bloc, and the BRICS Plus bloc of nations over the coming decades may emerge along the following lines. 1. The Eurasian fault line. The boundary between Western-oriented Turkey and the predominantly Muslim Turkic-speaking nations of Central Asia, including Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Azerbaijan, may become a flashpoint. Turkey's NATO membership and its historical ties to the West could put it at odds with these nations, which are increasingly aligned with Russia and China. Point 2, Balkan fault line. The legacy of the Yugoslav wars and the ongoing tensions between Serbia and Kosovo could escalate into a broader conflict involving NATO and BRICS Plus nations. Serbia's historical ties to Russia and Orthodox Christianity may lead it to seek closer ties with Russia and China, while Kosovo's Albanian majority may continue to seek recognition and support from Western nations. And again, Albania is considered a Latin language civilization. Point 3, Middle East fault line, Western Asia. The ongoing conflicts across Western Asia in Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and that there's more than that. Syria, Iraq, Lebanon, Jordan, because the West Bank, remember the West Bank, occupied West Bank, that's part of Jordan, Palestine and Yemen, well as the Israeli-Palestinian dispute could continue to simmer and potentially draw in NATO and BRICS Plus nations. Iran, as a key player in the region, may find itself at further odds with the West over issues like nuclear proliferation and regional influence, while Saudi Arabia and other Gulf states may seek to counterbalance Iranian power with Western support. Good point. Going forward, South Caucasus frontline. The Nagorno-Karabakh conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan could escalate into a broader conflict involving Russia, Turkey, and Western nations. The regional strategic importance with pipelines and trade routes connecting Europe and Asia makes it a potential flashpoint. Point 5, the Indian Ocean fault line. The competition for influence and resources in the Indian Ocean, particularly in the Strait of Malacca and the Arabian Sea, could lead to tensions between NATO and BRICS Plus nations. India's growing naval presence and its membership in the Quad Alliance with the US, Japan, and Australia may be seen as a challenge to China, while the US and its allies may seek to counterbalance Chinese influence in the region. And again, India presents itself as somewhat schizophrenic here. Is or is it ain't? Uh, Obviously, a non-aligned India would probably be absolute best for the country's self-interest, except for because of the legacy of British colonialism in India and the Indian elite governance so much seeing itself as distinct from their own people that they see themselves as being prestigious because of this legacy of the British crown. So, in my opinion, India is somewhat schizophrenic, multiple personalities as its function in the world. India and schizophrenia. I'm just going to put that in just as a point of reference to come back and develop that idea out a little bit more. Point 6, Africa fault line. The competition for resources, influence, and territory in a new scramble for Africa could lead to conflicts, direct conflicts between BRICS and NATO nations. The competition for resources, influence, and territory in a new scramble for Africa could lead to direct military conflicts between NATO and BRICS plus nations. The presence of Western powers in countries like Libya, Mali, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo may be seen as a challenge by Russia and China, which are increasing their investments and influence on the continent. These fault lines are not exhaustive, and the actual conflicts that emerge will be shaped by a complex array of factors, including local dynamics, economic interests, and global power shifts. However, by considering the historical and cultural tensions between civilizations, we can identify potential flashpoints where conflicts may arise between the NATO Western Bloc and the BRICS Plus bloc of nations over the coming decades. Samuel P. Huntington's book, The Clash of Civilizations and the Remaking of World Order, posits that future conflicts will be driven by cultural and civilizational differences rather than ideological or economic ones. Applying this framework to the potential frontiers of conflict between the NATO Western Bloc and the BRICS Plus bloc, several regions and issues could become flashpoints. This is overlapping. This is, again, a different search engine, AI search, and I use as many as 4 of them to paint the big picture, and then I have to edit them and merge them together and then rewrite them in my own original text. That's the work that's required when using these AI search engines for a book. We don't want to just search one sentence, copy and cut and paste it and call that a chapter. That's really lazy work. And it's not original work. And these AI search engines have a very strong bias against telling the whole truth. And if you haven't researched beyond those to understand what aspects of the truth they are eliminating, then you're not a good writer. You're not a good researcher. You might be a great writer, but one would never know because AI is doing the writing. So we're talking about these frameworks. Again, the first framework, Eastern Europe, the ongoing tension between NATO and Russia, particularly in Ukraine, could escalate. The Baltic states and other Eastern European countries might also become areas of contention. Not only the Baltic states, but the Black Sea. And the Black Sea is already become a problem. In addition to the Black Sea area, in addition to the Black Sea region, The Baltic states and other Eastern European countries might also become areas of contention. Point 2, territorial disputes in the South China Sea. China's territorial claims and military presence in the South China Sea could lead to conflicts with Western aligned nations and the U.S. Navy, which seeks to ensure freedom of navigation in the region. Of course, China's reclamation of Taiwan, including the reclamation of Taiwan, and here we go. 1 second. Let me repeat, territorial disputes in the South China Sea. China's territorial claims and military presence in the South China Sea, including the reclamation of Taiwan, could lead to conflicts with Western aligned nations and the U.S. Navy, which seeks to ensure freedom of navigation in the region, Middle East, and I would say also the Korean Peninsula needs to be put in here. And to be clear, with no clear ending of the 1950s Korean War, escalating conflicts could cause an explosive outbreak of violence, potentially leading to nuclear missile exchanges. Our worst nightmare. So, the Korean Peninsula, big problem there. Next, we have Middle East. Much of the West Asia region remains a volatile hotspot due to its strategic importance and energy resources. Conflicts involving Iran, a key BRICS Plus member, and its influence in Syria, Iraq, and Yemen could draw in NATO countries. The antagonistic presence of the antagonistic presence of the Zionist state of Israel as a proxy military force of several Western powers is perhaps the most dangerous powder keg in the world. Since its inception, not exception, inception, in 1948, Israel has fought some 20 distinct wars. After the October 2023 Hamas attack, Israel Defense Forces, IDF, launched violent campaigns and bombings against the Gazan Palestinians, Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, Iran, Iraq, and the occupied West Bank. And I didn't put Jordan in there. Occupied West Bank, which is technically still a part of Jordan. Oh, I had that already in the next sentence. The occupied West Bank, which was taken from Jordan in the Six-Day War of 1967. So I went to type that next one in, and that was literally after the comma. Sorry about that. Again, after the October 2023 Hamas attack, Israel Defense Forces, IDF, launched violent campaigns and bombings against the Gazan Palestinians, Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, Iran, Iraq, and the occupied West Bank, which was taken from Jordan in the Six-Day War of 1967. Africa. As both blocs vie for influence and resources, African nations could become battlegrounds for proxy conflicts. China's significant investments and Russia's military engagements in Africa, I would say Russia's military partnerships with African states can be expected to continue to clash with Western interests. I'll repeat, China's significant investments and Russia's military partnerships with African states can be expected to continue to clash with Western interests. Latin America. Countries like Brazil, a BRICS Plus member, could become focal points of geopolitical rivalry, especially if they align more closely with China and Russia against U.S. influence in the region. And the Arctic. Melting ice caps are opening new shipping routes and resource opportunities, leading to potential conflicts over territorial claims and control between NATO countries and Russia. The next section, I'm still developing. I was working on this morning, and there's new research and new actions coming on that will be included. But this next section talks about de-dollarization begins. China moves to dump the dollar. Since 2010, the majority of China's cross-border payments, like those of many countries, have been settled in U.S. dollars. As of the first quarter of 2023, that's no longer the case. I mentioned this graphic from the Heinrich Foundation, and I can eliminate that to make it to be the A graphic. The second in the three-part series covering the future of trade provides visual context to the growing use of the Chinese renminbi, RMB, in payments both domestically and globally. And it goes on to talk about the de-dollarization of China's cross-border transactions. This is excerpted from the report that I was just citing. And let me just make this a quotation block. This analysis uses Bloomberg's data on the share of China's payments and receipts in renminbi, U.S. dollars, and other currencies from 2010 to 2024. In the first few months of 2010, settlements in local currency accounted for less than 1% of China's cross-border payments, compared to approximately 83% in U.S. dollars. China has since closed that gap. China has since closed that gap. In March 2023, the share of the renminbi in China's settlements surpassed the U.S. dollar for the first time. 3 reasons. Here's an article I'm citing, and let me just make sure this is cited as a reference, normal italicized. 3 reasons the U.S. dollar can't be dethroned as the world's dominant currency, according to Morgan Stanley. This article, written by Jennifer Soar, updated on October 22, 2024. So I'm going to read from that article. It's not too lengthy, but I did, because this is kind of new research for me. Actually, I have it over here on this desktop in the original from Business Insider. And so I'm going to share that link with those of you who are listening audience in case you want to study along with us. We'd love to have your input for today's conversation. There is that link. I put it up on the YouTube, as well as we're going to push this link up for our Facebook family. Boom, shakalaka, boom, boom, boom. as well as I'm going to push this link up for our not you now, but our Rumble family. Here's the reference I'm going to be reading from for the next couple of minutes. Let me double check my time, see how much time we got here. We're pressing. I knew today was going to be a little bit long. I'm going to press this issue a little bit here more. Where we at? Where we is right here. Where we is. Oh, I went here, created a new link, uploaded that page here, and it should have been refresh and then read from the article. Once it finishes refreshing, it's not refreshing fast enough. Yeah, it did. Sorry, bear with me, everybody. My computer is carrying a heavy load today. Here's what the article has to say. Where did I put it? Here we go. De-dollarization. 3 reasons the dollar can't be dethroned as the world's dominant currency, according to Morgan Stanley. Again, October 22, 2024, written by Jennifer Soar. She wrote 3 highlights from the article. De-dollarization efforts won't do much to dethrone the dollar, Morgan Stanley said. Now, I was just looking at a documentary yesterday about the housing crash and financial crash of 2008 and the role of Morgan Stanley in that. Without cussing, I would say that these motor scooters don't deserve much credibility at all. They will tell any lie possible to protect their massive profits from manipulating the entire world. So point number 2, there are no true alternatives to holding the US dollar at the moment, Morgan Stanley strategist said, and that's just not true. That's just is not true. And point 3, the bank pointed to 3 reasons why de-dollarization fears are overblown. Let's read what Morgan Stanley has to say. The dollar's status as a top currency of central banks and for international trade probably isn't fading soon. Probably. There's one of those ambiguous terms. According to Morgan Stanley, the investment bank pointed to fears that the US dollar could eventually be dethroned as the world's top held and most widely used currency. Rivals like the Chinese yuan or the Japanese yen or even a shared BRICS currency could disrupt the dollar's stats. Some commentators have warned. But there are key reasons dollar dominance isn't going away anytime soon, Morgan Stanley strategist said. Quote, which currency would you want to own when global stock markets start to fall and the global economy tends to head into recession? You want to be positioning in US dollars because that has historically been the exchange rate of reaction to these kinds of events, unquote. James Lord, the bank's head of FX strategy, that's financial exchange strategy for emerging markets, said in a recent podcast, and that FX would be foreign exchange. That's like, what do they call it? Forex. Bottom line, King Dollar doesn't really have any challengers. Michael Zazas, the firm's head of U.S. policy research, added, the firm pointed to 3 factors that will keep the dollar top dog status in financial marketing. And those previous quotes they used from these individuals, they don't carry much weight. This is propaganda, people. This is the system using propaganda and fear-mongering to prop itself up. Oh, don't worry. You can trust us, said Morgan Stanley, Bear Stearns, Bank of America, and the Federal Exchange Commission during the housing crash of 2008 to 2010. And that is still lingering. We're still feeling the effects of that. Point number 1, the yuan isn't liquid enough to challenge the dollar. China's yuan, which officials in Beijing have been trying to position as a challenger to the dollar on the world stage, isn't liquid enough to truly disrupt the dominance of the greenback, the strategist said. That's partly due to strict capital controls China has on its currency. which limit the amount of cash that can be taken in and out of the country. But wait a minute, they say it's not liquid enough. Are they talking about they need to be like the U.S. and print bales, bundles, cartloads, plane loads of $100 bills and ship them around the world? The only ones who are really handling those $100 bills are the international illicit economies, such as the drug trade and the arms trade. So they say it's not liquid enough. That is a big lie. They continue. It seems unlikely to challenge U.S. dollar meaningfully anytime soon. To do so, we think China would need to relax control of its currency and open the capital account, meaning fiat. It doesn't seem likely that Beijing will want to do this anytime soon, Lord said. And that's why Beijing is beating you guys in purchasing power parity as the #1 economy in the world. I say. Point. Questions linger over China's economy. Given sagging consumer demand and the nation's ongoing property crisis. Those are problems, but they're not hindering the Chinese international trade. Point 3, China may make some progress in denominating more of its bilateral trade in U.S. dollars, but the impact that has on global metrics of currency dominance is likely to be incremental, Lord added. Well, you know, the big change is not just all at once. It's incremental, you Lord. Point 2, concerns over the U.S. debt won't affect the dollar. Dollar doomsayers say trust is waning in the greenback as concerns mount over the U.S. rising debt balance. As of this year, the government has racked up over $34 trillion in debt, a record amount. And that it says as of this year, racked up over 34 trillion. That's not 34 trillion for this year. That's a cumulative national debt. But $34 trillion, when you're talking about tax income, it'll take generations to pay that off, if ever. It may just come to the point that the U.S. national debt and the dependency on the dollar gets so great that the system just crashes. If the system just crashes like that, it would not be in the best self-interest of the world to do what they did after 2008 as rebuild the system based upon the system's already existing foundation. It only caused much greater crisis. Yet, that debt, over $34 trillion in debt, has little impact on the U.S. dollar, given the currency's long-running reputation as highly liquid, safe haven asset. I understand the concern, but for the foreseeable future, there's not much to it. As I said, depending on the election outcome in the U.S., today's election day, there's some fiscal expansion on the table. But it's not egregious in our view. And unless we think the Fed can't fight inflation, and our economists definitely think they can, it's hard to see a channel toward the dollar becoming an unstable currency. And when they talk about this inflation, we cannot rely on government figures charting the real inflation that's affecting your household and my household. Just look at food. Food inflation is still continuing. It's still continuing. Just look at healthcare expenses. Not only do we see healthcare expenses inflating, but the chronic illnesses that demand money from our households towards the medical pharmaceutical drug complex, those illnesses are still rising while the rate of medical inflation is several points higher than the national inflation across the consumer spectrum. So I'm sorry, but these guys are gaslighting the public. They're blowing smoke up people's rear ends right now. In Business Insider, Morgan Stanley, they're gaslighting people. Can you not hear it? Am I not adequately explaining what's going on? Somebody, you got to talk to me because doggone it, this is too much for me to handle. This is all on my own. Is anybody talking to me? Nobody saying a word. I did put up the article for you to read it on your own in real time. I do have a significantly large size audience. But you guys are paralyzed right now. And that's a little bit concerning. That's a little bit frightening. Let's continue. I am reading from my Brave browser. Got so many browsers open. Let me just figure out who am I talking to? Where am I talking to them at? And just real closely, inflation has cooled dramatically from its highs since 2022, despite pandemic-era spending and mounting debt levels. Consumer prices grew just 3.3% year per year in May, according to the latest inflation report, down from a peak of 9.1% several years ago. Just real quickly, I have one search engine already open. I'm going to ask it real quickly, what is the current rate of home purchasing increasing in the U.S. from what is the annual rate of home purchasing increasing from, let's say, 2015 through 2024. The annual rate of home purchasing price. That's what I'm looking for. Purchasing price. So I just want to show you the inflation. Now, I hope I got this question correctly. I'm using search engine here. We're going to Ecosia. The annual rate of home purchasing price increases in the U.S. can vary significantly based on economic conditions, interest rates, and local market dynamics. From 2015 to 2024, home prices have generally shown a trend of increasing with notable spikes in certain years, particularly during the pandemic when demand surged. And that demand surge was also due to, in no small part, to the big corporations which were making more money faster than ever before, using part of that money to buy up housing and build housing and jam themselves further into as an interface between young families and home ownership. So here's what the numbers. Here are some approximate annual trends based on available data. Now again, the target rate for inflation has been 2% from the Fed targets. We do know it got way out of control in 2022 and 2023. Here's what the number said. 2015 to 2016, home prices increased about 5 to 6% annually. That's 2 to 3 times the target Fed rate for inflation. 2017 to 2019, the home growth rate remains steady at around 4 to 5% per year. That's twice to 2.5 times the target Fed rate for inflation. 2020, a significant increase around 7 to 8% as demand surged. We're talking about 3 to 4 times the target Fed rate on inflation. 2021, home prices saw an unprecedented rise with 15 to 20% in many markets. We're talking about 7 to 10%, 7 to 10 times, not percent, 7 to 10 times the Fed target rate for inflation in the country. 2022 to 23, growth began to stabilize but remained elevated with increases of 5 to 10% depending on the area. We're talking about 2.5 to 5 times the federal target on inflation. You see where I'm going. This is why this article from Business Insider doesn't make any sense. I'm trying my best not to cuss, but inside my head, my brain is battling against the F word. 2024, predictions vary, but some sources suggest a potential leveling off or a slight decrease in price growth due to rising interest rates and economic factors. Well, we saw those increases rising anywhere between 2 times or 2.5 times, 2 times 2017 to 2019 was a range, to as much as 15 to 20% rise in 2021. From 2017 to 2019 to 2021, we saw that explosive increase in housing costs. So I'm going to reread that last sentence from the report from Morgan Stanley that appeared in Business Insider. They said, and I'm going to repeat it, inflation has cooled dramatically from its highs since 2022, despite pandemic-era spending and mounting debt levels. Consumer prices grew just 3.3% year-on-year in May, according to the latest inflation prices, down from a peak of 9.1% several years ago. That's just consumer. But you got to have a place to live, people. You got to have somewhere to live. And the best way to have some place to live is to buy the home and invest in the home and keep that home in the family for generations. And that's just becoming almost impossible for many people. And lastly, point number 3 of this main article, the article again entitled 3 Reasons the Dollar Can't Be Dethroned as the World's Dominant Currency, according to Morgan Stanley. Point number 3 is crypto isn't a viable alternative. While cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin are liquid, they're too volatile to be considered a true alternative to the dollar, strategist says. Now, as I'm starting to read this section, I'm going to ask you, are they or are they not going to mention CBDCs in this paragraph when it says, quote, crypto is not a viable alternative? They're just talking about Bitcoin, Ethereum, and other derivatives like that. They are not talking about central bank digital currencies using crypto in replacement of fiat. While cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin are liquid, they're too volatile to be considered true alternative to the dollar, strategists said. And that's actually not true, but I can understand why they would say that. It's not true, though. If I'm holding a crypto coin that rises, say, 10% a month, I'm less likely to use that for trade and instead just hoard it in my wallet to benefit from its price appreciation. And that is just absolutely ridiculous logic. David Adams, Morgan Stanley's head of G10 FX strategy. Now, reasonable people can disagree about whether cryptocurrencies are going to appreciate or depreciate, but I'd argue that the best outcome for a dominant currency is neither, unquote. Other economic experts have also brushed off the possibility of the dollar being toppled from its dominant status anytime soon. Displacing a dominant currency is something that happens over the course of decades, economists previously told Business Insider, as it takes time for people to shift to other currencies once a dominant currency is recognized as quote unquote safe. The story originally published in June 2024, and I'm glad I read that. I thought it was going to be longer, take longer to read than what it did. I'm glad I read that because my book, Disaster Preparedness for World Wars V and VI, proposes an incredibly dramatic, radical departure from the standard education that we have received from Western cultural hegemonic dominance. They've been lying about everything. And they are also lying about the stability of the dollar, the dominance of the dollar. They are lying here about cryptocurrency. You notice they did not mention central bank digital currencies backed by natural resources. They didn't back that. Backed by gold standard. One country has already launched one, even though it's because the country's economy has been so constricted and limited, and that country is Zimbabwe. They have launched Zimbabwe CBDC called the ZIG, backed by gold. And that's the trend for the future. It's not the Chinese renminbi And that word is so hard to say. Renminbi. It's not the Chinese renminbi or the Chinese yuan as a fiat currency that's going to displace the dollar. No, it's not. It is a Chinese central bank digital currency that's based upon their existing fiat that is aligned to the nation's on-hand gold reserves that will dethrone the non-backed by gold US dollar. When Richard Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard, it unleashed the gates of hell. It did. And let me put that in the report, because this is real important. And I think we're up to that point where I introduced this article, and I'm just going to put this in, and I'm just going to make this point here, and I don't need that entire one in there, but I'm just going to say this. When this is normal, okay, when Richard Nixon decoupled the USD from international gold standards, it unleashed the gates of hell in international trade and finance. So I'm just going to highlight that. I'm going to come back, and that's going to be developed out as a significant portion of this chapter. And I think I may have gotten through this chapter. I just read that extensive article, and if so, I think we may be through for today's study. Oh, no, I'm not through. I may have to come back tomorrow. Let me see how much time I got, because this next section is so very important. Let me see if I can do this in 13 minutes. I think I can. Double check 1 second. No, we're going to have to come back tomorrow to finish this, the next portion of chapter 6. This is most important and the largest chapter of the book. The book is entitled Survival Strategies for Survival Preparation, what's it called? For World Wars 5 and 6. And when we come back, we're going to be talking about first point, subchapter is entitled Strategies for Resistance, Liberation, and Sovereignty. And the next subchapter, World War VI Goes Hot. And this is very important for us to understand. World War VI goes hot. The fighting has already begun. The next subchapter after that, electrical grid dangers from space or cyber terrorism. That will include dangers from coronal mass ejections. We've already talked about cyber terrorism to some extent, but that's going to continue. We will go to the global threat, deeper into the global threat of cyber terrorism on electrical grids. Very important as well. And that is going to conclude the chapter. So we've come a long way, but we got so much further to go. And then there will be a summary summarizing World War VI and the future of humanity in the 21st century. Very important point. So, what do you think? Anybody have any opinions? Thumbs up? Anybody got anything to say? Let me just real quickly, I'm going to wrap this section up. I wasn't able, up until earlier, wasn't able to get anybody to respond. And guess what? Got out of the program with Very small audience and no one responding. Did I scare you? Did I do a bad job of making my points and explaining what was going on? Ah. Or was I censored? Maybe just nobody heard anything. Nobody heard anything. Could very well be. On that note, I'm going to get out of here, everybody. I think I did a good job. I'm really enjoying writing this book. I love it when I'm able to get intelligent people into a conversation and start to delineate what I'm talking about in this book, even though they do sound as if they're interested that this is good argument, reasonable argument. But then again, kind of quickly the conversation dissipates and we start talking about, fried chicken and other kind of things that are peripheral issues. Today is election day. I'm not really excited about it, which is why I didn't really bring it up. And I was not going to bring it up as a theme, the subject, the topic for today's show, because I don't want anyone out there to think I'm taking sides. When both major political parties did everything they could to exclude other voices from being heard, that was a move for me to say, this race ain't for you. You don't have a pony in this race. You don't have a dog in this race. So you can get excited. I'm not faulting you for that. If you want to, go out and vote. If you don't want to go out and vote, don't let nobody shame you into thinking that you cheated them by not acquiescing with what they wanted you to do. Oh, and that's why you tune into your favorite. We aim to be your favorite. We are LIB Radio. We are LIB TV. We are livinginblack.com. Peace and prosperity to each and every one of you on your favorite. We aim to be your favorite. LIB Radio, LIB TV, and livinginblack.com. Peace, y'all.